The quiet of our house had become a presence all its own. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, not the comfortable silence of two people who know each other so well, words are sometimes unnecessary. This was a heavy, suffocating stillness broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the soft rustle of David turning the pages of his architectural digest. For 15 years, this had been the soundtrack of my evenings. I would sit on one end of the sofa, pretending to read a novel, and he would be on the other, surrounded by his schematics and stress load calculations. We were like two satellites in a familiar orbit, close enough to see each other, but separated by a vast, unbridgeable space. David was a good man. I must make that clear from the beginning. He was decent, responsible, and kind in a quiet, undemonstrative way. He provided a beautiful home, remembered our anniversary with sensible, thoughtful gifts, and never raised his voice in anger. For a long time, that was enough. I thought that was what happiness was, the absence of conflict, the steady accumulation of days. But somewhere along the way, the comfort had curdled into something else, a profound loneliness that clung to me like a second skin. Our conversations had dwindled to logistical updates. Did you call the plumber? Your mother phoned. We're out of milk. The man I'd married, the one who'd once talked for hours about his dream to design buildings that would touch the sky, had retreated deep inside himself, leaving behind this reliable, predictable shell. I suppose that's how I started to justify it to myself. It wasn't that I was a bad person seeking something illicit. I was a lonely person, seeking a connection that had withered in the sterile ground of my marriage. The affair didn't begin with a bang, not with a passionate kiss or forbidden declaration. It began with a compliment. His name was Liam. He was a freelance graphic designer who'd been hired by the small interior design firm where I worked part-time as an office manager. The first time he walked in, he brought a gust of energy with him. He had an easy smile and a way of making eye contact that felt like he was truly seeing you, not just looking in your direction. I was helping him set up his access pass when he glanced at the small watercolor painting I'd hung next to my desk, a simple landscape I'd done years ago in a fit of nostalgia. "That's lovely," he said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. "The light in the corner there, you've captured that late afternoon feeling perfectly. It's melancholy but peaceful." I was so startled, I nearly dropped the pass. David had seen that painting 100 times. His only comment years ago had been, "That's nice, honey. We should get a proper frame for it." He never had. But Liam had looked at it for 5 seconds and understood the exact emotion I'd been trying to convey. It was the first time in years anyone had looked at something I'd created and seen me. After that, our interactions became the highlight of my week. He'd always find a reason to stop by my desk, to share a funny story about a client or ask my opinion on a color palette. He listened to my answers, his head tilted, actually considering my thoughts. Where David was solid and immovable like a great oak tree, Liam was like sunlight dancing on water, bright, captivating, and impossible to hold on to. The attention was a drug, and I was starving for it. The first time I agreed to have coffee with him, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told David I was meeting an old friend from college. The lie tasted sour on my tongue, but the thrill of having a secret, a piece of my life that was just for me, was intoxicating. That coffee stretched into a 2-hour conversation where we talked about everything: our favorite books, our childhood dreams, our frustrations. I heard myself saying things I didn't even know I felt, things I could never say to David, because it would require admitting our life together was lacking. "You have so much life in you, Clara," Liam said to me that day, his hand briefly covering mine on the table. "It's a shame to keep it all locked away." And that was it. That was the hook. He made me feel like I was a treasure waiting to be discovered, not a piece of furniture that had become part of the scenery. The affair, when it inevitably, terribly began, was less about physical passion and more about emotional validation. The stolen hours in a mid-range hotel room felt less like sin and more like a desperate attempt to feel alive. I was a ghost in my own home, and Liam was the only one who could see me. I became a master of deception. I developed a system of alibis so elaborate I sometimes impressed myself. A new book club that met on Tuesday evenings, a sudden influx of work requiring late nights, a fictional friend, Rebecca, who was going through a messy divorce and needed my support. David, lost in the world of concrete and steel beams, never questioned it. His trust was absolute, a fortress I was casually, carelessly betraying. There were moments of piercing guilt, usually when I'd come home to find he'd made dinner for me, a plate kept warm in the oven, a note scrawled in his neat architect's handwriting. Hope your day was good. Love, D. Those notes were like daggers. I'd crumble them up quickly, shove them deep into the trash, and try to forget the look of quiet devotion I imagined on his face as he wrote them. It was around this time that I began to notice a shift in David. At first, it was subtle. He started getting home earlier. He'd suggest we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in years. He began asking me questions, real questions, not just about the logistics of our lives. What did you think about that article I left on the counter? Or if you could travel anywhere tomorrow, where would you go? I was so wrapped up in my own secret world that I mistook his attention for a coincidence, or perhaps a midlife crisis. I even felt a flicker of annoyance. His sudden interest felt like an intrusion on the double life I was so carefully curating. One evening, he came home with tickets to the symphony. He said, "I remember you used to love it." A hopeful look in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a decade. I had to cancel plans with Liam. I made up an excuse about a family emergency, my fingers trembling as I typed the text. The entire night at the symphony, I was a bundle of nervous energy, barely hearing the music, my mind on Liam and the lie I told him. David, however, seemed completely at peace. He sat beside me, his posture relaxed, a small, unreadable smile on his face as he watched the orchestra. On the drive home, he reached over and took my hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Clara," he said, his eyes on the road ahead. "About us, about the future. I know I haven't been the most present husband. I want to change that." His words should have been a balm. They should have filled me with hope and spurred a confession. Instead, they filled me with a cold, creeping dread. It was too late. I was in too deep. The web of lies I had spun was now my reality. And the man beside me, the good, decent man I had married, was suddenly a stranger again, but in a way that felt dangerous. His newfound attentiveness felt less like a reawakening and more like a strategy. But that was just my guilt talking, wasn't it? It was easier to suspect him than to face the monstrous truth of what I had become. The truth was, I was so busy playing my part in the secret drama of my affair that I failed to see the curtains were rising on a much larger, more terrifying production, one that David had been writing and directing all along. The shift in David, once I started to truly notice it, was not just subtle, it was profound. It was as if he had woken up from a long slumber and decided to redesign himself with the same meticulous care he applied to his buildings. The man who used to wear the same comfortable, slightly frayed sweaters started appearing in tailored shirts that actually fit his shoulders. He began going to the gym not with the New Year's resolution fervor that would fade, but with the quiet, relentless consistency. The softness around his middle tightened, and a new sharpness entered his gaze. He even changed his cologne, swapping the familiar, comforting scent I'd known for years for something sharper, more citrusy and cedar. At first, this transformation played perfectly into the narrative I had constructed for myself. See, I thought, with a flush of selfish pride, my happiness with Liam is radiating outward, improving even my marriage. David is finally stepping up because he senses a threat. It was a gratifying, arrogant assumption. I felt in control of two men, balancing them like a masterful puppeteer. The guilt was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was drowned out by the exhilarating symphony of my own desirability. David's conversations evolved from mundane logistics to something resembling actual intimacy. He started a project he called The Aperture, a commercial high-rise that he described as the pinnacle of his career. He'd talk about it over dinner, his eyes alight with a passion I hadn't seen since we were dating. He spoke of light wells and atriums, of creating a building that breathed. I found myself drawn in, not by the architectural jargon, but by his energy. For the first time in a decade, I was seeing the man I'd fallen in love with, the visionary, the artist. He began asking for my opinion. Do you think a south-facing main entrance would feel more welcoming, Clara? Or the client wants a cold, modern lobby, but I think that's a mistake. What's your instinct? My instinct? He was asking for my instinct. Liam listened to my feelings, but David was suddenly valuing my mind. It created a confusing dissonance. My afternoons with Liam, once filled with thrilling secrecy, began to feel shallow. Our conversations, which I had once found so profound, started to seem like a rehearsed performance of intimacy. He would tell me I was beautiful, that I was misunderstood, that I deserved more. But David was now showing me in tangible ways that I was smart, that my perspective mattered. The contrast was unsettling. The most significant change was the trip. David came home one evening, a strange, almost nervous excitement about him. The primary investor for the Aperture is hosting a gala at the site, he said. It's a black tie affair, a celebration of the final design approval. I want you to come with me. My heart did a complicated flip-flop. A gala in another city. It sounded like something from a movie. A world away from my clandestine meetings at anonymous hotel bars. This was public. This was proud. Of course, I heard myself say. The decision made before my conscious mind could even process the complications. I told Liam I had a family obligation, a cousin's wedding I couldn't get out of. He was disappointed, which fed my ego, but his disappointment felt petulant compared to the earnest hope in David's eyes. As I packed my best evening gown, a deep emerald silk I hadn't worn in years, I felt a flicker of something genuine from my husband. This felt like a turning point, a chance to step out of the shadows and back into the light of my own life. I made a silent promise to myself. After this trip, I would end it with Liam. This gala would be the beautiful, dignified closing chapter on my mistake and the beginning of a new, better marriage with the new, improved David. The event was everything he promised and more. It was held in a sleek, modern art museum adjacent to the construction site. Everyone was elegant and important. David was magnetic. He held my arm firmly, guiding me through the crowd, introducing me not just as his wife, but as his sounding board and secret weapon. The way he looked at me with pride, with possession, made my breath catch. For a few glorious hours, I wasn't Clara the adulteress. I was Clara, but cherished partner of a brilliant man. I belonged here, in this world with him. During his speech, he stood under a spotlight, commanding the room with an easy authority. He spoke of integrity and design, of building something that would last. And then he paused, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. They say that behind every great structure is a great foundation, he said, his voice softening. That's true in architecture and it's true in life. I've been fortunate to have a foundation of unwavering support for 15 years. Thank you, Clara. Tears welled in my eyes. This was it. This was the moment of redemption. The applause felt like a baptism. As he stepped down from the podium, he took my hand, his grip strong and sure. There's someone very important I want you to meet, he said, his expression unreadable. The man who made all this possible, the primary investor for the Aperture.
He's been insisting on meeting the woman I credit with keeping me sane. My heart swelled with pride. This was my official welcome back. He led me through the glittering crowd toward a group of men in tuxedos standing near a massive window overlooking the city. As we approached, one of the men turned, a polite, professional smile on his face. The world did not so much stop as it shattered into a million jagged pieces. The air vanished from my lungs. The man smiling at me with a glass of champagne in his hand and a look of casual corporate curiosity was Liam. My Liam. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. I felt David's hand tighten on my arm. A firm, steadying pressure that now felt like a shackle. I looked from Liam's perfectly composed, unfamiliar face to David's, and in my husband's eyes, I saw it. The warmth was gone. The pride was gone. In its place was a cold, terrifying clarity. There was no anger, no hurt, just a calm, devastating satisfaction. "Darling," David said, his voice smooth as silk, cutting through the ringing in my ears. "I'd like you to meet Robert Markham." "Robert, this is my wife, Clara." Robert Markham, not Liam. Robert Markham. Robert extended his hand. "A genuine pleasure, Clara," he said, his voice the same, but the cadence all wrong, stripped of all its intimate warmth. It was the voice of a businessman. "David has told me so much about you. It's wonderful to finally put a face to the name." I think I mumbled something, my hand limp in his. I felt dizzy, disconnected from my own body. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. David leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. His whisper was a quiet for me alone, and it carried the weight of a final judgment. "A strong foundation is everything, Clara," he murmured, his breath cold against my skin. "It's what keeps everything from collapsing when the truth comes to light. And every successful project requires a thorough understanding of the materials you're working with, even the flawed ones." The pieces crashed together in my mind with brutal, unforgiving force. The renewed attention, the questions about my opinions, the gym, the clothes, the trip. It wasn't a rekindling of romance. It was research. It was strategy. He hadn't been winning me back. He had been studying me, reinforcing my own vanity and selfishness, making sure I would walk willingly into this exact moment. The affair wasn't my secret. It was his design. And I had been the willing, foolish centerpiece of his masterpiece of revenge. The gala, the speech, the proud introductions, it was all the grand unveiling. And as I stood there, trapped between my husband and my lover, who was not my lover at all, but a stranger named Robert, I realized the most horrifying truth of all. The collapse had already begun, and I was buried in the rubble. The ride back to the hotel was a silence so absolute it felt like a physical substance, thick and suffocating. David didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He simply stared out the window of the taxi at the passing city lights, his profile as cold and etched as stone. The man who had held my hand with such pride hours before was now a stranger, an impenetrable fortress. I wanted to scream, to beg, to explain, but the sheer, terrifying precision of his revenge had stripped me of all words. What could I possibly say? Every excuse, every justification would sound pathetic and hollow against the monumental truth he had revealed. Back in the hotel room, the facade crumbled completely. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He simply walked to his suitcase, methodically began packing his things, and then moved to mine, his movements efficient and utterly devoid of emotion. What are you doing? I finally stammered, my voice a ragged whisper. I've booked you a separate room for the night, and a flight home, a different one from mine. David, please, we need to talk about this. At that, he stopped. He finally turned and looked at me, and the emptiness in his eyes was more frightening than any anger could have been. Talk, he repeated, the word flat. Clara, the talking is over. The investigation is complete. The demolition begins now. The following weeks were a blur of legal papers and that same chilling silence. He had planned everything. The divorce papers were ready, citing adultery with a name I now knew was Robert Markham. He had financial records, timelines. He even secured a statement from Robert, a bland corporate document confirming a professional relationship that perfectly aligned with David's case. Our friends, our family, they all saw a husband who had been brutally betrayed, who had gathered his evidence with stoic dignity. I was the villain in a story that he had written, directed, and starred in. The last time I saw him was at the final hearing. As the judge finalized the dissolution of our 15-year marriage, David stood, straightened his tie, and walked out without a backward glance. He had gotten his revenge, and it was perfect. It wasn't violent or loud. It was quiet, absolute, and permanent. He didn't just leave me. He made it so that the life I had, the person I thought I was, had never truly existed. He didn't destroy me with rage. He erased me with calm, calculated finality. And he walked away, free, into the life he had meticulously rebuilt while I was busy destroying ours. The foundation, it turned out, had been him all along, and I was the flaw that had been engineered out.